Good evening, everyone, to everyone attending today. Well, I'd like to welcome you to tonight's GCP South Community Forum. Thank you for your time. I'm joined by colleagues from GCP and also from Mott MacDonald for tonight's session to talk about the projects and schemes on the agenda. My name is Tom Bennett. I'm the head of comms for GCP. And these meetings are a chance for us to talk to you about all the different projects that are going on in the area and give you a chance to answer questions and see how they all fit together and so on. The bulk of tonight's presentation is focused on the Making Connections consultation that we've launched. We'll focus on that first and then go on to talk about the other projects. Just a little bit of housekeeping. Of course, we're all working from home, presenting from home and so on. So if the tech doesn't work, if people drop out, please bear with us. We'll try and fix it as soon as possible. We have an agenda for tonight, and if someone might put it up for me, we can just go through it. And there we go. So, as I say, introduction from myself. We'll go straight to Making Connections with Isabel Wade, and then we'll go on to a Q&A for that session. We've left quite a bit of time for that before we move on to talking about Cambridge South East Transport Phase 2 and do a Q&A on that session. And then move on to Cambridge South East Transport Phase 1 and Greenways, Q&A on that session, and then move to Foxton Travel Hub, Q&A for that, and then we'll close the meeting hopefully bang on 8. If I could ask people, if you're asking questions, please put your hand up, so if you want to ask a question in person, if you want to put a question in the chat, then please do, and we'll pick them all up as we go. The question and answer sessions will be chaired by my colleague Joe Field, who's on screen at the moment. So please do put your hand up if you want to speak in person, ask your question in person. And if you don't wish to do that, put it in the chat, then Joe will be able to go through comments and put them all together and ask those questions. As you can see from the timings, we're a little bit closer timings on the Q&A for the various projects because tonight's focus is really on making connections. But please, if you wouldn't mind being brief and cogent with your questions, we can get those questions put to the project team people and we can get them answered. That's it from me. Unless there's any questions to me, I'll hand over straight to my colleague Isabel.
Cool, thank you very much, Tom. I'm going to talk about the Making Connections consultation, which launched a couple of weeks ago and is running through till the 20th of December. So this consultation is about primarily 3 things. So first of all, our proposals for transforming the bus network. Secondly, about how we can create space for improvements to cycling, walking, as well as to our public spaces. And then thirdly, about the options for funding these improvements and creating the space that we need to deliver them, including looking at potential charge on vehicles driving or parking charges. Thanks, Debbie. Next slide. So I think we're all quite aware of some of the pressures that our area is facing over the coming years. So this includes things like increasing levels of congestion, and we know that some areas have had lower traffic levels during COVID, but actually for many places that level is back. And with the growth that's set out in the agreed local plans, we know that more people are going to be working and living in our area over the coming years, which is going to put more pressure on our transport network. We have high levels of air pollution, particularly in the city centre, with over 100 deaths a year in the area attributable to air pollution, as well as very high levels of carbon emissions as well. So what we want to do with these proposals is kind of take a balanced approach to tackling a variety of issues, and so what we want to do is reduce the amount of time that people need to spend travelling, whether that's by bus or by car, help people to access work, education, health services, kind of opportunities, particularly people who at the moment actually don't have a lot of options in that regard. We want to reduce emissions to improve air quality and to help meet local net zero commitments, and also make wider improvements that help us to kind of improve our health, improve the spaces that we kind of have in the city and more widely, and kind of, you know, make Greater Cambridge a good place to kind of work, travel, live, and kind of move around. So Debbie, could I have the next slide, please? So I'm going to talk through in a bit more detail a few aspects of these proposals. So the new bus network, kind of how we can lower traffic levels for better cycling and walking routes, as well as the options for a charge to fund better sustainable transport, as well as free up that space for public, for kind of more sustainable transport as well. Next slide, please. So just starting with the bus network. So what we are talking about here is something that is very different to what we have at the moment, a real step change in the sort of provision that the bus network offers people. So if you live in a larger village or a town, moving to having a bus every 10 minutes into Cambridge, some of those being express services, which would take quite a considerable amount of time off the journey, linking up to more kind of places, not just the city centre, in some of the more rural villages, which I know many places only have kind of, you know, 1 or 2 buses a day, sometimes even less frequently than that, moving to having a bus every hour. Within the city, talking about a minimum of a 10-minute frequency. Actually, in many places it would be more than that. And then we're also looking at fares as well. So how can we make journeys cheaper for people so that the bus really is an attractive alternative to travelling by car as well. Next slide, please, Debbie. So this is just a kind of overview of the bus network. I appreciate it's quite small and detailed, so we will be going through some of the areas on this in a bit more detail in a minute, particularly concentrating on the south area to the south of the city. But just to kind of reiterate some of what I've said, this really is a step change. We're also looking at things like operating hours. So I know one of the things that, you know, makes it more difficult to travel by bus at the moment is you know, needing to travel early morning or in the evening. So we're proposing this is a network that runs 5 a.m. to midnight, and that, you know, we do connect up people more widely as well. Next slide, please. So just in terms of within the city, so we haven't kind of drawn a detailed map of the city at this point, because we want to talk about kind of the sorts of connections people want to see, the sorts of service levels they want to see, and that will then inform the kind of detailed routing of buses. But we're proposing a network from 5 a.m. to midnight with kind of buses from you know, residential areas, not just into the city centre, but to places like the hospital, the science park, West Cambridge, the railway stations, and also thinking about how we link residential areas together, you know, how we get people to shops and services, and making sure that people are within a reasonable walk of the bus network, so that it's, you know, it's quite easy to kind of get a bus, get the journey, get near to your destination as well. And we're also looking at kind of cheaper fares options as well. So this includes things like, you know, should we move to a London style flat fare? You know, they have kind of £1.50 for each journey, or should we kind of look at reductions more kind of widely? Now, next slide, please. So across the network, you know, not just in the city, again, you know, longer operating hours, more express services, more rural services running more frequently. I think, you know, we're aware that we haven't necessarily put every single village on this map. That doesn't mean that not every village will have a service. I think that there is something about you know, a village has to be a certain size to support a bus service. If you don't have enough people kind of getting that, then an hourly service might not be appropriate. But we want to make sure that people can still plug into the network, whether that be through kind of a connecting service, demand responsive transport, or through access through a travel hub as well. Next slide, please. So just to talk through some of the local proposals in a bit more detail. So in the Haverhill corridor, we are talking about kind of regular buses every kind of 10 to 15 minutes coming in along both the new CSETS route as well as on the kind of current route as well. We would have some new rural connecting services as well, plugging people into that network so that kind of fast onward connections could happen more easily. And we're looking at connecting not just into kind of the biomedical campus in the city centre, but also round to the West Cambridge site as well. Next slide, please. Then in terms of kind of Royston, Saffron Walden, again, having kind of frequent services coming in from the two towns every 10 minutes, some of which would be express services. I think it's worth saying for kind of Haverhill, Saffron Walden, Royston, looking at about a 30-minute quicker journey using on this network, taking an express service, but also making sure we're still kind of covering the villages, and there's several new kind of rural routes that we're keen to explore as well with you. And I think I will kind of take questions on the bus network, as with everything else at the end, but I think we're very much putting these proposals out for consultation. It's not a kind of fixed idea of what a network should look like. The idea is to give a sense that the provision would be kind of vastly scaled up, and to get feedback on that so we can take that forward into kind of final design of the network. So next slide, please. So the kind of second part of the consultation that we're really keen to get feedback on is around how we deliver these improvements. So I think we've kind of been clear that, you know, if we want a bus kind of level of bus service that is kind of competitive with the car and does offer people the choice to travel by public transport, you know, for many more journeys. If we want to do that, and we want to also make fares cheaper, we think that that would cost in the region of £40 million per year. Obviously, you know, fare income is important, and if more people are getting the bus, then you'd expect that to go up. But we know from the experience of places like London that even actually when you have a really high level of coverage and a high level of patronage, you still need to put some public subsidy into the network to keep fares low and to keep that service level kind of across the area. So what all our kind of work to date has shown us is that if we want to make public transport, cycling and walking a reliable, attractive and fast choice for people, we need to raise that money so that we've got it to invest in additional services, as well as to keep improving our cycling and walking network. And we also need to reduce traffic levels and free up space so that we can run additional bus services, and so that they can run fast and reliably, rather than getting kind of stuck in traffic in the way they do at the moment. Next slide, please. So there are three broad options that we're asking about as part of the consultation and are keen to get views on. So on the left-hand side of your screen, you've got pollution charge and a flexible charge. And these are essentially variations whereby a car driving within an area would be charged once a day. Not kind of if you'd made several trips within that area, you wouldn't be charged more than once. A pollution charge, that charge would be based on kind of the emissions of the vehicle, whereas with a flexible charge, it might be that that is varied by time of day or day of week, depending on kind of levels of congestion and busyness. The other option that we're looking at is around parking charges. So that might be around, you know, applying charges to more of the city's parking, applying higher charges. It's also kind of looking specifically at something called a workplace parking levy, which is a fee that would be charged to organisations on an annual basis for the parking spaces that they have at workplaces. And it would be up to the employer what they did with that charge. So they could choose to pay it, they could choose to pass it on to their employees, they could choose to reduce the number of parking spaces they have in order to reduce the amount of money payable. And what we kind of want to know on this is kind of people's views on these options, but also what hours, you know, if we were to design something like this, what hours should it operate? What area should it cover? What would the impacts be as well? So, you know, thinking particularly about different groups of people, you know, how might this affect you, affect kind of friends and family, and are there things that we can think about in terms of design if we're taking this forward that would help address that as well. Next slide, please. So just to kind of make the wider link, and I'm sure this will be made throughout the meeting tonight, because we are talking about a lot of our projects, but the kind of Making Connections programme, which if you follow the GCP executive board is part of what we call the City Access project. It very much sits at the heart of the GCP's public transport programme. So, you know, as many of you will know, we have proposals for 4 high quality segregated routes operating with electric buses, bringing people into the city. City Access is kind of the glue in the middle that helps people get across the city, and also provides the connectivity onto those routes, you know, in terms of kind of covering a wider area, making sure the service levels are really attractive for people, and making sure that we kind of have a whole system approach that kind of offers a sustainable choice to people going forward as well. Next slide, please. So just kind of the final point before I move on to some kind of admin points is that we very much grounded these proposals and the Making Connections consultation in what we've heard previously from the public when we've consulted on this. So back in 2019, we did a survey called Choices for Better Journeys, which looked at what people wanted from public transport, and it also looked at some of the options for raising money and creating space. We also did a citizens' assembly in 2019, whereby a group of people who were randomly selected from the population and then stratified to essentially be demographically representative came together to discuss what we should do about improving public transport, cutting congestion, and tackling air pollution. And they very much came up with a vision around affordable, fast, reliable public transport, around a kind of environmental, zero carbon transport system, and about being people-centric and creating more space for people, for walking, for cycling in the city. So we very much kind of looked to that previous engagement in terms of what we're coming forward with now. Next slide, please. So just in terms of telling us what you think, so a little bit of information here about how you can do the survey, and if you have any questions. Next slide, please. And so, as I said, the consultation closes at midday on the 20th of December. What happens next essentially is that feedback will be collated and fed back to the executive board in June 2022, where they will make a kind of decision on next steps for the project. And I think that's all, but if there's one more slide, yeah, happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Isabel. Hi, everyone. I'm Jo Field. As Tom says, my role is to facilitate the questions. I'm an independent facilitator. I'm the Chief Executive of JFG Communications. So what I'm going to do, and there's already some questions coming in the chat, so thank you for those. So I'm going to take questions from the chat, but also if anyone wanted to use the raise their hand function and ask a question, you're very welcome to do that as well. And if you are putting questions in the chat and you would like the other attendees to see your questions, then please make sure that you are directing them in the toolbox to everyone rather than just to hosts and panelists. So we've got a couple of questions that have come in on buses. So one is regarding a perceived lack of drivers and how we're going to increase services if there's a lack of bus drivers. And equally, how did you settle on the running hours of the bus service? For example, how did you assess the need for in demand for late night services?
Cool, thank you. So just in terms of the operating hours, so I think that was designed partly around, nighttime economy demand, although I appreciate that doesn't capture the entire nighttime economy, as well as shift workers, particularly at the biomedical campus. But this is a consultation, so we're very keen to hear kind of people's thoughts on that. There are questions in the consultation about what hours people would use the bus. If we get lots of people saying they would use them 24 hours a day, that's something we can look at. Just in terms of the question about drivers, I think that's kind of something that is certainly a hot topic. What we would be proposing to do very likely is phase in the introduction of a network. So it built up, over the course of a period of time. So we would, hoping to recruit kind of over that period, and that would hopefully help with transition as well.
Thanks for that, Isabel. Just another question relating to buses about to what extent are the bus plans going to be tied in to the rail network and the rail timetables?
Yeah, thank you. So that, I think, in making sure this is an integrated network is definitely one of the things that we want to achieve with this. So making sure if you do have an hourly service, it gets you there to get your train, not 5 minutes afterwards. So yes, certainly that's the aim, and I know that we are looking at that already for a couple of places as well.
Brilliant, thank you. So I notice there's a few people that have raised their hand and would like to ask their question. So I'm going to go to Bob Ward first to ask his question.
Unmute. Can you hear what I'm saying? Very good. And my question is sort of a selfish one, really. I live in the central area of Cambridge, and I just wondered how it would be envisaged that the congestion charge would operate for people who live within that charge area.
Cool, thank you. So at the moment, what we're asking questions about is a zone scheme rather than a cordon scheme. So in a cordon scheme, it would just be that you pay if you cross the boundary. What we are looking at here is a zone scheme. So you would pay for any kind of, you would pay the daily charge if you live within the zone, if you travel within the zone, as well as you travel into, out of, or through it. But as I said, it's a consultation, and one of the questions is about impact on people. And I think we're very keen to hear from residents as part of that. And, that will feed into kind of the next stage of the proposals.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for that. Now I'm going to go to Robert Billingham, who would like to ask a question.
I think you might be on mute, Robert.
I said Finland isn't well served with buses at the moment. The number 9 bus to Ely is an hourly service, and then you change there to go out from Fens to Chatteris in March. Is that going to be improved? Do you hear me?
Yes, thank you. I think I missed the first bit of your question, which I think was saying about Finland.
Yeah, they're not very well served.
Yeah.
It's an hourly service to Ely, and then you have to change there for another service to get to Chatteris in March.
Yeah, so I think the bus service kind of network that we've put together here does kind of go into the edge of Finland at the moment, and does propose some improvements to that. I think that because we're the Greater Cambridge Partnership, we are focused on the Greater Cambridge area, but I would say that we work very closely with the combined authority, who are looking at bus service improvements across the wider area. And if we were to go forward with making bus service improvements and with some form of kind of charge, there would be a discussion about, how do we improve bus services more generally as well.
Thank
But
you.
please tell us in the consultation what you'd like to see as well.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. I'm going to go back to the questions in the chat now, and then we'll come back to the other people who have got their hands raised. So a couple of questions on the pollution charge. So first of all, which boundaries are you considering as using for the city for charging purposes? And also, what would happen if you live within a pollution or flexible charge area? Would you still have to pay it?
Cool, thanks. So I think the one about if you live within the area, I have answered. Just to kind of add to that, the reason why we are looking at a zone where everyone pays rather than a cordon is because we've done kind of surveys of traffic in Cambridge, and what that has shown is that 50% of the journeys within the city are people driving within the city. They're not people kind of coming in. And so that kind of 50-50 split, that's why we've kind of looked at a zone at this point. But as I said, keen to get feedback. In terms of the other question about the boundaries and the areas, we haven't got set boundaries or areas that we're looking at the moment. What we are kind of talking about in terms of this is the options in terms of the size of the area and the level of charge. So if we want a fantastic bus network and we want to raise enough money for that, we've broadly got two choices. We could have a smaller area that was focused on the city centre, but we would need to be looking at a higher charge if we wanted to raise those sorts of revenue, so somewhere in the region of £10 to £15. If the area was broader, covered more of the city, that could be a much lower charge, kind of more around the £5 mark. But that is something that we're seeking feedback on the consultation.
Okay, and then related to that, there's a question about on charging by car. Do you include commercial vehicles, electric vehicles, powered vehicles, e.g. e-scooters, or is it a specific tariff just for fossil fuel vehicles?
Well, thank you. So I think that would all depend on the design of the charge. So if you went for a pollution charge somewhere, so places like Birmingham and London, their ultra emission zone, they have kind of pollution-based charges, and those charges apply to all vehicles, not just cars. If it was something that was based more around kind of traffic levels, then you might look at a different set of vehicles for that. And again, a pollution charge, an electric vehicle doesn't pay. A more of a flexible charge they would pay. So again, that's something that we would like to get feedback on as part of the consultation. There are kind of trade-offs in that. If we exempted electric vehicles, that might be quite good in terms of encouraging people to get an electric vehicle. However, there's obviously a cost implication with that. Some people will find that much easier to do than others. And there's also, if more over time, as more people move to electric vehicles, it would mean the kind of effect of the charge would decline. So we would have less money to spend on improving public transport, which would be particularly important for people who couldn't change their vehicle. And we'd also have less space to run fast and reliable public transport. So that's the sort of kind of thing we want to explore as part of this.
Thanks, Isabel. I'm going to go back now to the people who have got their hands raised and would like to ask a question. So first of all, to Roger James. I think you might be muted, Roger.
Mute. Oh yes, I've got it now. Sorry, I was talking to myself. I live in one of the villages, so I have two questions, because basically the plans do not add up for the village at all. When you talk about a 1 hour service, you've got two big problems, one of which is the frequency, and the other is if you're really going to use it in a village, they're totally under capacity. If you say everybody who works in Cambridge has got to catch the bus, yeah, it just isn't going to work. So the first question is that it doesn't work at all for villages. And the second question related to that is, who is the consultation for, and were the focus groups representative of the local population, which I think, at least in terms of households, is 60,000 houses living outside of Cambridge and 50,000 live in Cambridge. So are you not designing a system only for people who live in Cambridge?
Cool, thank you. So I think in terms of kind of service for the villages, I think I'd be keen to get feedback on how we could improve that. So, perhaps as part of your consultation response, you could set that out. I think we're not saying everybody has to take the bus for every single journey. There might be, there's kind of the, using the local bus to get from your door. There might be other options such as using kind of travel hubs, park and ride as well. But, please tell us, what you would want to see. I think in terms of kind of focus groups and representation, I think I wasn't sure if you were referring to the Citizens Assembly that we'd we ran in 2019 with that.
Yeah, that's where you seem to have got your data from, but there's no data presented in terms of what the village representation was.
Yeah, so the way that was set up was that participants were split by, well, basically split by geography. So we had a kind of split of residents of Cambridge, residents of South Cambridgeshire, and then residents actually of the wider travel to work area, recognising that it's not just people who live in Greater Cambridge who need to travel to Cambridge, and that was basically done based on kind of census data about the proportion of people travelling in the city from those three areas, and we then had the kind of right number of participants for those three areas based on that data.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for that. Loads more questions in the chat, but I'm going to go to Howard Kettle first, who has had his hand raised for a while.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's actually the question in the chat. I did ask this question when the presentation was done to us a couple of weeks ago. This whole scenario where we're putting all these buses on medieval streets in the centre of Cambridge, I was told actually I'd got it wrong, because a lot of the buses won't go into central Cambridge, they'll only go halfway. So I'm just wondering how the whole thing is going to pan together, because the impression you're giving us is that for people like us who live in the villages, we're going to be able to get a local bus that goes into the centre, but that's apparently not now the case. And how you're going to actually fit all these buses. I've seen some reference to 400 buses in the rush hour, which isn't going to be very nice if you're walking or cycling.
Yep. So hopefully I can kind of clarify that a bit for you. So I think what we're saying is that there will be an overall uplift in services, but actually the kind of bus network that we have was designed for the city as it was kind of 20-30 years ago, where most people wanted to travel to the city centre. And with the kind of growth that has been experienced by the area over the last 20 years, actually that has changed. More people want to travel to some of the employment sites on the periphery. They might want to also travel to places that the bus network doesn't currently take them, that might actually not be very long journey from where they live at the moment, such as kind of local high streets as well. And so in terms of that bigger network, some of the new routes would be to places like the hospital, the biomedical campus, the West Cambridge site, the science park, not just into the city centre. I absolutely take the point about, a large number of buses accessing the city centre. I think it's something that we're very aware of. And one of the pieces of work that we want to do, subject to the outcome of this consultation, if we're moving forward to design a detailed bus network, is to look at how buses access the city centre and whether there is a better way of doing that than the current arrangement, that means that we can offer a higher capacity operation whilst also kind of improving the public realm in the city centre as well. So that's something where I don't have the answer for exactly how, but it's certainly something we're very aware of, and there are kind of options that we can look at for that as part of a detailed design, which would then, I think we've made a couple of references to, there would be a second consultation on any detailed proposals that come forward as a result of this, and that would be when we would kind of pick up issues like that and seek public feedback on it.
Okay, thank you. So am I right in saying then that the 10-minute service that you're suggesting is slightly disingenuous? It may not be a 10-minute service into Cambridge.
Well, it might not be every 10 minutes to the city centre, but it would be every 10 minutes to parts of Cambridge.
Thank you.
Thanks for that, Isabel. And just related to that sort of volume of buses question, there is another question about would you consider introducing school buses, so for example like in the US, to deal with the cars that are doing the school run?
Yeah, thank you. And another good question. So I think I guess we probably might not introduce a kind of American style school bus system, but certainly as part of designing the network, understanding kind of the flows of school children will be really important in terms of the design and making sure that, you know, services pick up that demand. I know that some schools do already provide their own services, for example, from the park and rides. So I think, you know, encouraging more of that in future will definitely be part of what we want to do too.
Great, thank you. I'm just scrolling through the questions in the chat here. I see that a few people have put comments in the chat, so thank you for those. We'll make sure they are noted. There was also one on, to find it, it was something about consistency of figures with the Cambridge local plan. So I know that GCP colleagues, you do talk to the Cambridge local plan team, and you'll take that point away and look at it to just check the consistency of figures. So we'll make sure that is looked at. I've been taking these in a funny order and I just want to make sure I haven't missed anything. Okay, so there's a couple of new ones. Is there a way to match passenger demand with bus capacity? Because, for example, a lot of rural buses could be running regularly empty outside of peak hours.
Yeah, thank you. So I think in terms of that there's kind of 2 points, I guess. First of all, you know, the way that we're kind of proposing to support, you know, the introduction of this bigger network. If we do that in a phased way, there's some kind of opportunity to test levels of demand and match services to them. There is a way in kind of rural areas that the combined authority is exploring of having kind of a more demand matched service, which is something called demand responsive transport. They have a trial that is being undertaken in West Huntingdonshire at the moment, and that effectively means that you kind of use an app on your phone or you ring a number to sort of book your seat on the bus, and the journey then kind of is tailored to the demand. That is an option for services. Equally, I know some people like scheduled services too, so we have asked a question in the consultation about the sort of services that people would like to see.
Thank you for that. One from Sam Davis, which I think you've bumped back up again. Good, because I'm scrolling through this chat and I'm thinking, oh, what questions have I missed? Okay, so could you give us an estimate of how many buses you envisage per hour on the main arterial routes, e.g. Hills Road, Milton Road, and if you're promising a 5 or 10 minute frequency?
Yeah, thank you. So I don't have a kind of exact number for you. Obviously, a 5 minute frequency on that road, you know, would be about 12 buses an hour in each direction. But it might be that you have more than one route that's served using that road. So that is something that will kind of come out of detailed modelling of the network, which would be done as part of any detailed design work leading, you know, following this consultation. But hopefully that gives you a little bit of a sense. But yeah, I don't have an exact number at the moment.
Okay, and then we've probably got time for just like 1 or 2 more questions. This one about Grantchester, so it's one of the villages not on the map, but suffers from classic last mile problems. So will there be a bus from Grantchester to Chumpington Park and Ride or Cambridge South, Cambridge Station, the Science Park?
Cool, thank you. Yes, so you know, I would imagine, apologies that it's not on this map, but I would very much imagine there would be a service through to kind of Trumpington Park and Ride and the biomedical campus, as well as into the city centre.
And then Roger James, I think we'll take this as the last question. Roger has his hand up, so we'll go to Roger and then we'll move on to the next agenda item. I think you must be on mute, Roger. Roger, do you have a question, or was your hand still up from the last time? Roger says you can't get off mute. Is somebody able to help us get Roger off mute, please? Roger, do you want
Can you hear me
Yes,
now? Oh,
perfect.
thank you, whoever pressed the magic button. No, sorry, I was saying I'm a parish councillor in Meldreth. So last night I sat through a local plan presentation, yeah, and I asked them whether they were talking to you, and they denied all responsibility. So I'm worried that the two schemes don't add up. And for example, in your presentation pack, you were suggesting 33,000 houses, whereas the local plan says 41,000, plus there are extras for things like the Oxcam Arc. And the other thing the local plan has done is it's localized the development in places like Cambourne and North Stowe. And I wondered, obviously, that has a big impact on the traffic levels and the likely use of the services. I just wondered if you guys were talking to their guys. And I know it's all a bit in motion at the moment, but I'm very worried that we have different groups looking at significantly different, significant bits of our infrastructure, and it doesn't seem to be joined up. So question, sorry, long preamble, question, will your senior person talk to the local plan senior person and produce something together that we can use? Because the local plan stuff is full of transport strategies, full of calculations on net carbon and all this sort of stuff. And either they're telling a different story to your workings, yeah, or you're repeating the same thing. So it would be good if you joined up. That's all I'm saying, really. So sorry, long rambling question, but I hope you get the point.
Yeah, thank you, Roger. I think we do. I just want to reassure you, we do meet regularly with them, and we kind of do try and be as joined up as we can in our work. I think in terms of the kind of 33,000, 41,000, 33,000 is the kind of adopted local plan figure, and 41,000 is obviously the emerging local plan figure. As the two kind of sets of, you know, the local plan and this evolve together, the technical work is, you know, a lot of that will be done in parallel. So for example, things like you know, the modeling of transport, that's all done on the same kind of system and basis, so that as we develop the detailed proposals, they do go forwards together. So, you know, I kind of take your point about the communication. You know, we have met them regularly, and we do try to do that. But you know, take that point and try and reassure you there is kind of working together happening, and will happen in future as well.
Okay, thank you again.
Thanks for that, Isabel, and thanks for all the questions and comments. So we're now going to move on to the next item on the agenda. We're going to move on to Jane, who's going to talk to us about Cambridge South East Transport Phase 2.
Hello, everyone. This is just a quick update on what the project has been up to since it was approved by the board. Next slide, please. So 2020, we had our outline business case approved by the GCP board and the preferred route, which was the brown route. Then to go environment impact presentation, that was December last year we had that. And 2021, which is this year, we attended the exec board and we got approval to proceed to our Transport and Works Act submission. So since then, well, that's what we've been preparing for. Next slide, please. Okay. What we have on the screen is, I'm sure most people are familiar with it. This is the preferred route. So we have the travel hub close to the just off the A11. And we've got 3 stops at Vibram, that's Sustain, Stapleford, Great Shelford, and into Cambridge Biomedical Campus. Next slide, please. James is the environmental lead from MOTS. He's just going to talk us through the environmental statement, which has been prepared for the Transport and Works Act application. James. Have we got James on?
He's muted.
Sorry, forgot to unmute myself. Start again. Good evening, everyone. So as Jane says, we've been doing a number of pieces of work to prepare for the Transport Works Act application, one of which is the environmental impact assessment, which was subject of public consultation about this time last year, running up to Christmas. And since then, we've been completing the EIA with a view to publishing an environmental statement as part of the Transport Works Act application, which Jane will run through what the process is going to be shortly. So the environmental statement is due to be completed in the next week or so. It covers all the issues that were raised as needing to be covered in a scoping opinion that we received from the Department of Transport, including responses from local planning authorities in Greater Cambridge area. So that's City Council, District Council, South Cambridge District Council and the County Council. Also from an Environment Agency and Natural England. There are a number of chapters in the environmental statement, some upfront chapters setting the background and context and the options that have been considered prior to the preferred scheme decision that Jane mentioned was granted by the board to take forward into the EIA. And then the EIA has covered the 12 technical chapters that you are seeing on the screen, which were required as set out in the scoping opinion. So that's air quality, climate change, carbon, historic environment, land use and land take, traffic and transport, water resources and flood risk, biodiversity issues, community and health, landscape and visual, noise and vibration, resources and waste, and a cumulative impact assessment, which considers the impact of the scheme in combination with other development that's going on in the vicinity. Next slide, please. In order to do this work, we've carried out a number of surveys. Some of the surveys have been going on for some time, particularly the ecology ones, been going on since 2018, right up until the last surveys were carried out in October this year. The ecology ones have covered the various different protected species, protected under law, as well as more general surveys on habitats and the habitats. We've also done a comprehensive ground investigation, largely to inform the detailed design later on. But as part of that, we collected a number of samples, both to test for land quality, that's contamination risks associated with some historic landfill sites that are adjacent to the scheme. And we also looked at agricultural soil quality, or agricultural land character, as it's sometimes referred to. We did carry out air quality monitoring over a 6-month period, even though COVID was affecting traffic levels. We did start that monitoring sometime before COVID hit, so that's work that we did as well. There've been a number of geophysical surveys and walkovers, as well as trial trenching. For those of you who live in the area will have seen some of that work ongoing over the last winter and early this year. We've done flood risk modelling as well for any works that might impact the floodplains around the River Granta, using a model that was provided by the Environment Agency. Next slide, please. There are a number of documents that are being produced for GCP, which set out how construction would be managed in terms of environmental effects and minimizing environmental effects and impacts on neighbours. There are draft documents that will be submitted as part of the environmental statement, one of which is an overarching code of construction practice. There's a more specific construction environmental management plan. There's a draft spoil management strategy, and there's a construction lighting plan. These various documents set out limits on certain activities, but they're draft at this stage. This is a standard approach. They will have to be finalized by an appointed contractor. They're the responsibility of the contractor to implement. The contractor would be appointed by GCP once approval for the scheme is granted by Secretary of State. They need to be finalized once it's been approved, because if there are any conditions that are not already captured in the draft documents, then those need to be incorporated in them. They will then be submitted to the local authority for the local authority to approve prior to any construction commencing on site. Next slide, please. There have been a number of environmental mitigation measures included in the scheme that'll be submitted. The design of the scheme has been developed to minimize impacts on the floodplains, to minimize loss of flood storage. And where we can't avoid that, compensation storage is provided within the design and the footprint. The lighting design is minimizing impacts on all neighbors as much as possible, but also making sure that it's the safety of users of the scheme is still ensured through lighting at night. The landscape design is entirely, the landscape design is there to soften the impacts, and part of that is also working with the ecologists to develop appropriate landscape planting schemes that will create new habitats to mitigate impact on protected species and generally improve biodiversity and connectivity as much as possible. There are acoustic barriers, noise barriers in the form of fencing and low bunds in proximity to sensitive receptors, principally around the proposed stops. We have carbon reduction measures included, solar panels at the travel hub and stud lighting along the travel path. And as mentioned by Isabel, there's also proposals for fully electric buses to be operating on the scheme from the start, if practical. But as a minimum, there will be hybrid buses, which would be electric within the city limits if fully electric buses are not practical at the start of the scheme. There's improved active travel connections along the entire route with a new pedestrian, cycling and equestrian route included in the design. And we are trying to recreate kind of setting of the historic water meadows around Babraham as part of the drainage design for the travel hub, and some bunding to reduce visual impacts on some of the residents closest to the scheme of Great Shelford. Next slide, please. The scheme has been developed with taking a consideration of the need to deliver biodiversity net gain. GCP have a commitment to try and achieve, to deliver at least 10% and if not 20% overall on its schemes. As the scheme, although it goes through the countryside, it's largely based on agricultural land, which has a low biodiversity value. And with the planting that we are creating along the entire route and around the travel hub, there's significant new habitat created. And so there is a substantial biodiversity net gain created by the scheme. And the new Environment Bill, which was approved in Parliament 2 weeks ago, requires 10% minimum biodiversity net gain for developments of this kind, and this scheme will substantially exceed that. In order to deliver the biodiversity net gain, the Environment Bill requires biodiversity net gain to be delivered over a 30-year period, or to be managed and therefore delivered through a 30-year period. And we have produced a landscape and environmental management plan. It's called the LEMP, as part of the environmental statement, setting out how that should be done. It includes the planting and it includes management regimes over the 30-year period, which the County Council would be taking forward. Next slide, please. As one can imagine, for a scheme of this nature, there will be in some environmental effects. Many of the environmental effects are reduced or by the mitigation measures we've included. Now I've put here that there are some residual environmental effects which in the strict process and protocols that we have for assessing environmental impact assessment. We define certain effects as being significant if they are above a certain threshold. Those thresholds are quite technical in how you derive them, and that is all set out in the detail of individual chapters and supporting documents in the environmental statement. But in summary, during construction, we have buried impacts. We have impacts on buried archaeology. Clearly, as we're going to be excavating along the route, if there's archaeology in the area, which we know there is from the trial trenching, then we will have an impact on that. That will be unavoidable. During construction, there would be a large impact, a temporary large impact on the River Granta landscape character area and on visual receptors. We've done viewpoint assessments for, I think, 33 viewpoints along the route. The viewpoints have been agreed with the local landscape officers, and some have been suggested by stakeholders, which we've included as well. And from those 33, there are 11 which have some large or moderate effects during construction. There are some access issues on the Cambridge Biomedical Campus as one works along Francis Crick Avenue. And there will be temporary impacts on public rights of way and permissive paths where the works are crossing those paths. Those impacts are largely going to be minor diversions during construction. There could be some relatively short-term closures, but they would be short-term in the matter of a day or two. And there'll be impacts on agricultural operations, particularly around Babraham and the Travel Hub site. During operation, there are some adverse effects. The large impact on the River Granta is reduced to moderate impact on the River Granta landscape area. And there would be a moderate impacts on 7 viewpoints after the landscape planting has matured. There will be delays for drivers on Addenbrooks Road approaching CBC at the roundabout at the bottom of Francis Crick Avenue. And there would be loss of agricultural land of high quality, as one can imagine. We're creating this across the fields that are used for agriculture at the moment. But there would be some significant beneficial effects, particularly for active travellers, and as we mentioned already, biodiversity net gain. I think that's possibly the last slide. Yeah, from me.
Okay, thank you, James. So what we have now is the process for the submission itself. So we had the EI consultation last year, October to December. We had the finalized design, that was 5th of March this year. We then went to the Joint Assembly meeting and then the GCP Exec Board to request approval to submit our Transport and Works Act application. Since then, we have been preparing the documents as James have just mentioned. And the intention is for us to attend full council the 14th of December to seek approval to submit the Transport and Works Act. And the application we're looking at in January 2022 for the application itself. So that should answer the question from Howard that was on the chat. Next slide, please. So this is what the program looks like. The EIA we've had, the submission itself early 2022, January, we'll have the PI towards the end of the year, next year. The start of construction is programmed for 2023 and the completion we envisage is going to be 2025, early 2026. Next slide, please. Questions?
Thanks for that, Jane and James. And yeah, we've got a short amount of time to cover questions. And I see that Howard's one was answered, so that's good. There's another one in the chat about the slides, which I'm sure all the attendees would be interested to know whether the slides will be, if they're not available already on the GCP website, will they be, or will there be somewhere that people can access the slides from this evening?
We can put the slides up. That's right, Alistair. That can be published on the GCP or on individual project website.
Yeah, we can put the slides for CSET up on the CSET pages. a recording of the video of this evening will also be made available on the GCP YouTube channel.
Okay, thanks for that. And now I'm going to go to Malcolm Grimshaw, who would like to ask a question, who has his hand raised. Can we unmute Malcolm, please?
Sorry, I didn't mean to raise my hand. That was a mistake.
Okay, no worries, Malcolm. Thanks for that. Right, we have a few more questions in the chat now. Will the ES, which you said would be completed by end November, be published in advance of the TWAO submission in January?
Shall I answer that, Jane?
Yeah.
So the TWAO submission in January includes the environmental statement and all the other documents that have to be submitted, of which there are, it's quite a significant number. There's the actual draft order that is being applied for. There are all the plans that have to go alongside the draft order. So it won't, the ES will not be published in advance. It'll be published at the same time. It won't actually be published by GCP. Oh, no, actually, I'm not quite sure the process, but the application is to the Department of Transport. The Department of Transport will then make the documents available and will invite a formal period of consultation on the full application. To be honest, I don't think simply submitting publishing the ES for anybody would be fully informative. You really should be looking at the complete application.
Great, thank you for that. Okay, it's a question from Mabella. With the blockages of the road to the CBC, what is going to be put in place so that emergency vehicles are not delayed accessing the campus?
So there would be impacts on users of the Francis Crick Avenue. A lot of those users are pedestrians who are walking around in that area. So there will be diversions to, there's a public right-of-way footpath along Francis Crick Avenue. There would be diversions to that. Some of the businesses along Francis Crick Avenue will have variations on how access to the sites, the actual business sites, as the construction progresses. But in terms of the emergency vehicle access, that obviously is a principal and primary element to keep flowing. There is a requirement in the construction management plans for a full transport plan to be developed in consultation with the hospital on how to maintain emergency vehicle access during construction. That would be the responsibility of the contractors to develop at the time. One of the reasons why you cannot do that now is there's a lot of development going on CBC, not just the works for CSET. Cambridge South Station construction will potentially be happening in parallel, partly in parallel. It is due to be completed before CSET is completed, but there would be works there, and also the ongoing development of CBC itself. So there's quite a complex set of projects ongoing in that area, for which all the contractors and the operators of the various facilities on CBC will have to be working together to ensure emergency access is not compromised.
Thanks, James. Okay, another couple of questions in the chat. First of all, a question about COVID and post-lockdown. Now that more people are working from home, have the numbers been revised at all to take that into account?
Jane, would you like me to take that one?
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Yes. This is something that we have considered. We did explain at the previous LLF back in the summer how we had reduced the capacity of the A11 Travel Hub, which is now 1,250 spaces. However, I think as Isabel mentioned earlier, we are seeing, a strong recovery in traffic volumes, and also in many parts of the country, local bus use is now already getting back to of the order of 80% of pre-COVID demand, and that trend is expected to continue, in the period before the CSET scheme will be constructed. There's a specific issue in terms of demand for travel to the biomedical campus. Many of the jobs at the biomedical campus, medical staff at the hospitals, hospital support services staff, people working in lab environments at the biomedical campus, those simply are not jobs that that can be done from home to the extent of, in comparison to perhaps, a more typical, a more, diverse range of jobs, in a city centre environment. So we're continuing to monitor that, but there are some, and there's some specific reasons connected to the nature of employment in the biomedical campus and at the other employment campuses that the scheme serves, that means that we believe the impact of flexible working from home will be lower in this particular case than it might be more generally in Greater Cambridge.
Thanks for that, Mike. And then just one final question before we move on. Will there be any effect on the Magog Downs?
So there's no direct effect. I mean, we are about 1 kilometre away from the Magog Downs. If you're standing on the Magog Downs and you're looking away to the west and the southwest, then you will see the scheme. Certainly in the first, during construction, it will be visible, and in the first years of operation, whilst the landscape planting is becoming established. But the landscape planting is intended to, will be a hedge along most of the routes in that area. There will be trees in places and blocks of trees around the crossing of the Granta at Stapleford, which are intended to screen the crossing in due course. So, and from the top of Magog down, the crossing is the actual position of the river and the crossing of the point of the river is quite difficult to establish now because of the distance. It's quite far away, and existing vegetation that will be retained. So you'll be able to see it from Magog Downs, but there will be no direct effect on the Magog Downs themselves. The other opportunity that the scheme creates is improved access to Magog Downs for people from the city and from surrounding areas. There will be a stop on Haverhill Road where people will be able to alight from the buses. There is currently a footway along the Haverhill Road up to Magog Down. It's not in the best of condition. The scheme did try to see whether that was something that could be included within the project, but for reasons which are complex and not worth going into here, it won't be included in the project itself, but there is a commitment from GCP to try and improve that footway through normal powers that are available to the county and GCP itself, so that there would be an improved access for pedestrians and cyclists up to Magog Downs. So hopefully there would be more people able to use that, yeah. Yeah, and Linda, I see your point about the questions. noted.
Thank you for that, James. Yeah, all points noted, and thanks to the audience for your questions, and thank you, James and Mike and Jane as well. So we're now going to move on to the next agenda item. We're going to pass over to Martin, who is going to talk to us about Cambridge South East Transport Phase 1 and Greenways. Over to you, Martin.
Me. Hello.
Can hear you now. Couldn't hear you.
I think my video has been stopped, so it needs to be started, I think, by somebody else. But it doesn't matter to me. I'm quite happy for people not to see me. So I can start my video now. Yeah, it's all okay. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for your time this evening. Just an opportunity for me to talk about the Cambridge South East Transport Phase 1 project and give you a bit of an update on where things are. As probably many people on the call will know, these projects are sort of centered on improving safety at maybe some accident cluster sites along the 1307 itself. And this year, we've been focused on getting our sort of planning and preparation ready for delivery, as well as delivering some of the schemes themselves. So it covers quite a section of the 1307, as you can see, from Addenbrooke's all the way out towards Horseheath. Some of the schemes we've delivered already, for example, the variable speed cameras scheme 17, and we've delivered earlier this year Granham's Road. So what I'll do is I'll just move on to the next slide and focus a little bit on the Linton Greenway. The Linton Greenway, we know it is Scheme 3, and it starts from Addenbrooke's and works its way out to Linton itself, going through the Beerbraham Research Campus. So what we've achieved so far this year, working from about early August, we've completed Addenbrooke's towards Causeway, and we're currently working on what we call Phase 2, which is Wards Causeway to Granham's Road. We would expect to complete that in the next week or so, and then we'll be off the road for a bit because we won't be able to work during the December period. We hope to commence again in the new year and complete the section from Granham's down to the Beerbraham Park and Ride. That, of course, is subject to us acquiring the road space from the Streetworks team. So probably next slide, please. I'm sorry these slides are rather small and all that, but it's the Greenway covers about 9 miles in total, so it's kind of quite difficult to maybe present in any other way. But this particular section is section 2 of the Greenway, and that goes from the Beerbraham Park and Ride itself through the Hintonway Roundabout, up by Wandlebury and out to the Beerbraham Research Campus roundabout. We have done some work on the Copley Hill section this year in July, and about 400 or 500 meters of footway there, or active travel path. And we have, there's a couple of pinch points along this route, which people on the call will know about, which is from the Copley to the Beerbraham Research Campus roundabout. But what we've done recently is trim back the overgrowth just to make that active travel path currently more usable. People on the call will also know that we are trying where we can to deliver the greenways to the LTN 120 standard, which is trying to get a 3-meter shared use active pathway. And in some cases that proves quite challenging simply because we don't have the space to retrofit. So we're always looking at options on this particular section from Copley to the campus roundabout. We're looking at options which would involve us creating a bridleway separate to the current footway that's there at the moment. Next slide, please. This section really, you notice it's called section 4 because section 3 sits with section 3 sits with Jane, sorry, as part of the CSET2 works. So we pick up on the Linton Greenway from section 4, which is really on Newmarket Road. Our preferred solution is to use Bournebridge Road because it's doesn't require land acquisition and it's more cost effective and easier to deliver. I have been speaking to Abington councillors who favour another route which would involve land take and wouldn't be as easy delivered. So we haven't nailed our colours to the mast exactly with this route, but it's looking more likely that this is the one we would prompt to deliver. There's a little bit you'll see perhaps at the bottom of the screen where this route connects into Scheme 9, which I'll talk about in a moment, which is the work at Hildesham. And it then carries on from Hildesham with Scheme sort of 3, Section 4C, which leads us to connect from Hildesham to Dalehead Foods around about that area as we head in towards Linton. So next slide, please. This is a bit of a messy slide, so my apologies for my poor presentation here, but effectively this is really telling us that we're going to join from Dalehead Foods, which we've already done, connect into Linton Village College itself and make an improvement to the pedestrian crossing point at the college. So generally, just talking about the greenways, we've made good progress this year in my view, and we're continuing to make plans to have a target date for delivering the Linton Greenway in the entirety of what sits between the CSET Phase 1 project by sort of autumn next year, and I'm very hopeful we can do that. Probably next slide, please. This is just a scheme that I've skipped in terms of the geography, but going back to the Beberham Park and Ride, this is, we know, as Scheme 19 to us, which is the Beberham Park and Ride extension. It's effectively creating another 150 car parking spaces or vehicle spaces with cycling provision as well at this particular site. We are currently awaiting planning approval, but if we are successful in achieving that status, we will commence construction in early 2022, probably March, because we'll have to be mindful of winter and the effect of excavating and chalk would have on our construction progress. Next slide, please. I'm sorry, this slide is quite high level, but this is the job really at what we call Scheme 4, which is at the Haverhill Road. It's beside sort of Wandlebury Country Park as well. And so the idea here is that we would realign the Haverhill Road, the junction between Haverhill Road and the Magog Farm Shop, and that sort of section is quite a dangerous and a high accident location, as some of the schemes along the 1307 are, and this scheme is probably a little behind where the others are in terms of our planning. We're completing our final design. We don't have all the land we would like to build everything, but we're continuing to negotiate on one particular aspect there. And we are hoping to complete our final design and perhaps put a planning application in, I don't know, March, April time next year, I guess, to see can we get approval and perhaps start building next year if we can. Next slide, please. This is a scheme which we're really ready to go at. At this point, we have achieved our permitted development certification from South Cambs District Council. We have pretty much all the pieces of the jigsaw in place that we need to commence construction here, and we would like to, well, start in February if we could, but if not, we'll start in March and start to deliver this particular project, which I know a lot of people on the call will be delighted to hear, and we'd be delighted to do it also. Next slide, please. This is the Barclay Roundabout. Again, we're in good shape with this scheme. We've pretty much our final design done. We've acquired probably 99% of the land we actually need to build this. We will go out for contractors to price in the next month, and we will look to start in spring of next year if we get our permitted development certificate, which I sincerely hope we will. Sorry, just to go back that slide, please. This scheme will be done in Connect, which I haven't shown the slide for. There is Dean's Cross, which is a fairly notorious crossing point, which we want to close. And the idea of building the roundabout is that vehicles won't be able to cross at Dean's Cross, but they'll have to use this roundabout as part of their journey. And I haven't shown that particular slide, but these two schemes will be done together. Next slide, please. This is just a little bit of an update on something that I'm familiar with, but it's not my particular overall project. But as you're aware, the aspiration of GCP is to build a number of greenways, 12 in total. The board approval for these was achieved last year, just before I joined GCP. So the transport consultants have been appointed this summer to complete the detailed designs. They are Atkins and WSP, and their responsibilities are outlined on the slide, so I won't repeat that. Next slide, please. So current activity, WSP and Atkins and GCP officers are focusing on the initial technical design work, including the environmental assessments, landowner referencing and negotiation, and the next stage of the business case. And so the next steps is during next year, the initial design work will be completed. Once the initial designs are completed, the stakeholder engagement, communities and the public will take place. The outline business case for all the greenways will be completed next year, and the GCP board will review progress in mid next year. And there's a hope to start actual construction works on some of the sections where it's possible, i.e. sections where the work can be done without needing additional planning permission, or the land is already owned by the council themselves. And the aspiration is to complete the program by 2025. So that's me. So I'd like to take any questions I can on my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Martin. Yeah, a few questions coming in already. And just actually one comment from Sam Davis, just offering a vote of thanks to you on behalf of residents of Hills Road for your exemplary communication and willingness to cooperate. So we'll definitely make sure that point is noted. Again, I'll take questions if anyone wants to raise their hand. And we've got one in the chat from Jim Rickard about the Haverhill Road, Wandlebury area. Is there any provision for improving pedestrian access from Magog down across Wandlebury? There was talking in the past of an MNU underpass.
Yeah. Excuse me. Jim, the NMU underpass was considered as part of the design solutions, but it's now been changed to the current design solution, which does include crossing points for all modes of transport, equestrians, pedestrians, cycle users, etc. But there isn't an underpass, and there won't be as part of our design solution. It was considered and not a cost-effective solution. These decisions were taken some time ago, certainly before my time with GCP, but that's the current position.
Okay, thanks, Martin. And now I'm going to go to John Batchelor, who has raised his hand.
Right, thanks very much. Hello, Martin. Nice to see you again. following on from last week, I just wondered if you had any more update on the Greenway going into the Abingtons.
No, John, thank you for your time last week, and fellow councillors, it was a pleasure to meet you all. No, we are looking at, I haven't nailed my colours to the mast, we haven't nailed our colours to the mast as to what we want to do here, but as I said at our meeting, the likely solution is to use Bourne Bridge Road, simply because it doesn't require land acquisition, and we could move on it reasonably quickly. But one of the actions from me from the meeting was to return to the councillors with some ideas on what the route through Bourne Bridge up Church Lane and High Street would actually entail. And I will do that, and perhaps we can meet early next year so we can look at those options.
And the pickup from the Hildisham crossing.
Yes. Oh, sorry. Well, we had a fantastic meeting today on site, I have to say, with the Pampersford Estates and our design team. I'm very pleased with how the meeting went, and I am more confident than ever I was that we can deliver that link to the Greenway. You know, take on board the views of everyone. So I felt the meeting was productive on what was a rather beautiful morning. It was good.
Right, thanks, Martin. Fingers crossed for that one then.
All right, John. Thanks for your
you.
good wishes. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Martin. Okay, now moving on to back to questions in the chat. There's one from Duncan Ogilvie. Is there any chance of even a modest safety enhancement from Barclay to Linton to facilitate safe active travel?
Difficult question, because I suppose you're talking about the quiet routes. Duncan, is that correct, or am I misinterpreting your question? Sorry, it's probably unfair for me to ask a question when I've been asked a question. I suppose from our discussions earlier,
yeah, he says correct.
Yeah, that's fine. Well, I don't like to overpromise and underdeliver, and certainly part of our aspiration is not to do that as part of the CSET phase 1 delivery, which is quite defined in its parameters and the solutions. So I think the answer at the moment, Duncan, is probably no. I can't deliver a quiet way down that route, and I'm not able to maybe look at changing the alignment on the Barclay Road that we had looked at that day. So I think that's the honest answer. I think when Peter and Blake and myself attended the Southern Forum meetings, there was discussion about enhancing greenways and looking at these type of solutions in the future. So I'd have to say, as part of CSET phase 1, no, but perhaps there's another opportunity to look at these aspects of improvements that you have mentioned.
Okay, and then one other on Linton Greenway. Is it being delivered to include equestrians in its entirety?
Yes, we do try. I know that's Linda probably has raised that question, I guess. Yeah. So Linda, yes is the answer. That's not always easy to fix, as you know, and when we met out on site, I've explained that point. So I do understand the drive to do it. I did mention in my presentation about the section that we met on site to see, and I'm not going to give up on that to try and get a pathway from the research centre roundabout up to the Roman Road, like we talked about. So and perhaps the latest information on the call for sites might facilitate that conversation better.
Thanks, Martin. And just a reminder to attendees, when you're submitting questions in the chat, if you want all the attendees to be able to see your question, then please make sure you've put everyone in the to box rather than just hosts and panelists. Right, we have time for a couple more. Will there be a safe way to cross Barbraham Road from Park and Ride to Hinton Way, where there is a and a FP to 9 wheels in lots of acronyms in there.
Yeah, that we're looking at that, finalizing that design at the moment, and it's been through the road safety audit too. So the answer would be yes. We're trying to make sure that we have safe accesses for everyone approaching the park and ride. There is work on the park and ride entrance itself, where the buses come in. There is work on the crossing, pedestrian crossing on that route, and we're looking at the roundabout to see how that can be improved as well to accommodate safe passage to that side.
Okay, thanks for that, Martin. And I think that is it for questions. So if there are no more questions for Martin, I'm going to move on to our next presenter. We have Tim, who's going to talk to us about the Foxton Travel Hub. So over to you, Tim.
Okay, thank you. So yes, hello everyone. I'm the project manager for Foxton Travel Hub. And if we can just move on to the next slide, Debbie, please. Okay, so the aim of my presentation tonight is just to reflect back and feedback from the engagement period that was held in September just gone. And really what I want to try and cover are the results of those engagement and the comments that we received back, as well as the paper that has just been published and been presented to the GCP Assembly. And we'll be going to the Executive Board on the 9th of December. Okay, thanks, Debbie. So at the public engagement, as it says there, in September of this year, this was the design that was presented for people to comment upon. The design shows a travel hub with 500 car parking spaces, 150 cycle spaces, a design that reflects the archaeology within the area, includes a bus layover area, a bus service that would run from Foxton to Whittlesford Station and connecting the local communities. It connects with the Melbourne Greenway and shows a reduction in the area of the speed limit reducing from 50 miles an hour to 30 miles an hour. It shows the aspirations to achieve 20% biodiversity net gain, as well as to retain the grade 2 listed building, or grade 2 listed building that was only listed this year, as well as an equestrian path, information point, toilet facilities, and a woodland walk. So next slide, please, Debbie. So from the public engagement period, we've tried to just show in this slide the key themes that came out of that engagement. The pie chart shows a proportion of the comments received, and the bullet points just reflect those comments and how we've sort of captured them as themes. So they were primarily around the A10 crossing, the justification of the scheme in terms of the numbers of car parking and cycle parking provided at the site, the traffic congestion in and around the area, and the environmental impacts of the proposed development, as well as issues of road safety and poor vehicle access. Okay, next slide, please, Debbie. So from the engagement period, the design has been revised, and this design has been presented in the paper that was recently heard at the Assembly, and again will be heard at the GCP Executive Board on the 9th of December. You will be able to see that there's been a reduction in size, a reduction of the site to approximately 60% of the previous image that I showed. And when I say 60%, I mean a reduction from 500 spaces, car parking spaces, to 200, and maintaining a higher percentage of cycle parking. So with 200 car parking and 100 cycle parking spaces, as well as the community use within the listed building to include cycle parking, secure cycle parking, as well as community use, and an additional waiting shelter and ticket machine on the northern side of the railways, as we look at the image on the slide. And then the intention is to retain the other elements that were included, such as the footbridge over the railway, the provisional design layout to reflect the archaeology in the area, as well as the bus lay-by, biodiversity net gain, information orchard planting, and access to parking on both sides of the disabled parking on both sides of the railway. So what we've tried to do is reduce the size of the site, which we feel addresses the sort of proportionality that was proposed, and reduces and rebalances the size of the site in line with the responses that we received from the local community and sort of wider stakeholders. So that's where we are, and that's what we're proposing, as I say, to the next executive board in December. Okay, so next slide, please, Debbie. So this just gives an indicative timeline of where we are. As I said, we've presented to the GCP executive board, the assembly in at the start of the month. We will be presenting to the executive board in December. And should we get permission to do so, that will then give us further design work and more work to be undertaken in order to aim to submit a planning application in April of next year, produce a full business case in June of next year, and then working towards scheme construction in 2023 with the scheme opening in 2024. So I appreciate that was quite a whistle-stop tour of the engagement period and the design, but happy to kind of open the floor to questions through Joe.
Thank you for that, Tim. I was just struggling to get my video back on and unmute myself. Yes, so as ever, if anyone would like to ask a question using the raise your hand function, that is fine. And we'll also take questions from the chat. So Roger, you have raised your hand and you've also asked a question in the chat. So I'm going to go over to you, Roger, and you can ask your question.
Okay, thank you. Hi, Tim. This is appalling, I would say. When we gave our feedback on a scheme that was very different to that you're now taking forward. And 2 points that I would make that are major problems of the scheme. Number one is you're still asking pedestrians to cross the A10 without any safety measures whatsoever. Kind of quote unquote, are you out of your minds on this one? And the other question is, if you look at the traffic levels, there's approximately, and it varies, approximately 200 cars for every one cycle at Foxton, if you just do a travel survey. So what you're doing is you're messing up the car journey, the car space, yeah, for a minority of users. So it's a hopelessly inefficient use of road space. And the other thing, which if you talk to any of the local councillors, they'll tell you, which you could even incorporate in this bastardized scheme, is you're taking up the space where you would want to build a road bridge over the A10. That's been on the cards for 20 years. The local residents have been asking to get rid of the level crossing and put a road bridge over the A10. So I just, honestly, I don't know what you're smoking on this one. So I'm sorry it's a bit of a rant, but you do have to answer, you do have to answer the questions. One, is it ethical to take this scheme forward? Because it's very different from that was proposed. And indeed, your first proposals didn't even have buses stopping at the scheme. So it shows you how ill thought through it is. Number two, are you doing anything to mitigate the danger to pedestrians of having to cross a major trunk road without any protection whatsoever? And number three, where is the data that says cyclists are more important than cars in this area, because certainly expecting people to cycle into Cambridge from this for this sort of distance is only for the Lycra brigade, and it doesn't help anybody who's a normal person. So they're my 3 questions. So sorry for the rant, but I am appalled at the quality of this thinking.
Okay, Joe, I'm happy to pick up those questions. So I'll just take them one by one in terms of the first question, which was about how ethical the scheme is. So the point of the engagement period is obviously to listen to those points of view coming forward, and a lot of those comments were about the size and the scale of the scheme, and the justification for the scheme obviously is supporting GCP aims of trying to get people onto public transport at their sort of first possible interchange. So the access from the A10 at Foxton obviously provides people to interchange with the public transport in the form of the train station, making a very much quicker journey into Cambridge and a much more sustainable journey via rail than it would be to onwards commute by a private vehicle. And then the second point was about the crossing of the A10. So in terms of measures that we're seeking to develop as part of the scheme, we have proposed a pedestrian refuge on the A10 to facilitate a 2-part crossing. That proposal has been through the road safety audit stage 1, and that is the process for the development of such a scheme, and it's currently undertaking the RSA 2, the road safety audit 2 process as we speak. Obviously, if the scheme does not pass the road safety audit, then we won't get any further with that crossing, and it would need to be reconsidered. However, the indication is, and the design standards indicate that it is an appropriately safe crossing, and all the evidence to date does illustrate that. And then in relation to the data about cycling to the site, so the site connects the Barrington cycleway that is being secured by Section 106 agreement that connects Barrington to Foxton, and will provide connectivity to the site. And it also connects to the Melbourne Greenway, which will allow people, for those people who wish to onwards commute as part of their cycle ride. And again, as part of the engagement period, there are very much a good number of people who wanted to undertake those journeys, not only on sort of traditional pedal bikes, as it were, but also on e-scooters, should they be permitted to do so, and on electric bikes as part of the connectivity to the
question on that part was numbers. So where's your survey numbers that justify taking up of use?
So in terms of the numbers of people cycling, sorry, is there a problem with my internet connection? I keep hearing Roger, but
it cut out for me as well, and I was wondering if it was mine, but I think Roger, you did cut out a little bit. So
yeah, it might be me. So the third question was on numbers. Where is the audit data that compares the number of cars that use that road space with the number of cycles that use that road space, given that you've got a totally inefficient use of the available road space? So all you're doing is you're converting, well, you're strangling the road, yeah, and the consequence of strangling the road will be felt in pollution, will be felt in slowing people down, in emergency vehicles, and all that bad stuff, yeah. And you're doing it for the chimera of the 1 in 200 or less people in Lycra who actually use that stretch of road. I'm all for cycling where there's a high density of population, but this is out in the sticks where most people drive cars, and your plans ought to reflect reality, not some bogus pipe dream.
So in terms of stifling the traffic, the site proposes to intercept the existing traffic on the A10 and doesn't propose to sort of accommodate or create additional capacity on the A10. It's purely to switch those people who would choose to use the site to public transport.
No, your plans talk about strangling the A10, reducing the size of the road and reducing the speed of vehicles, yeah, in order to accommodate cyclists, and there aren't any cyclists.
So the proposal to reduce the speed limit is nothing to do with accommodating those people who choose to travel by bicycle. There is a separation of the greenway that that has clear separation from traffic movements. We are proposing to slow down traffic through the village and through the community, as is seen along the A10 further towards Cambridge, through other residential community. So it's to provide sort of parity of the speed limit and the environment travelling through Foxton as it would be travelling through Hawkston or Harston.
It's not what your proposal said. I'm sorry, that's not what your proposal said. Your proposal said that you were going to take road space, yeah, and give it to cycle space. And I'm asking you, what data is there? Data, I'm not asking about opinion. I'm not asking about grand plans. I'm asking about hard numbers, yeah? What data is there to justify any of this nonsense?
So there has been a WITCHR report undertaken, which assesses the amount of vehicles, all movements, and that is the vehicles that the motorised vehicles and the non-motorised vehicles within the area, and then that assesses the proportionality of the approach.
And cycles.
Cycles.
Does that include cycles?
Equestrians. Yes, it includes cyclists, equestrians, cars, HCVs, all of the vehicles, public transport, buses. So yes, that WITCHR report's been undertaken. And in terms of reducing,
so where is that report available? Because the local plan, and I talked earlier about the local plan, has all its documents on the web for people who are asked to comment to read. Yours didn't. There was very little data presented around the case of this thing, as is clear from all the changes that are being made in it. I mean, I need to get off. You've not answered any of my questions to my satisfaction.
Roger.
Somebody else is making comments in the chat, so I'll be quiet and let you.
Thanks, Roger, because there's quite a lot of other questions coming up now, and we want to make sure that other people get a chance to ask their questions. So thank you for asking those questions, and thank you to Tim for responding. And I'm sure you can email the GCP as well if there's further points and questions you would like to make.
Well, it will be, sorry, just to finish off, it will be nice that the people who responded to the questionnaire receive some sort of this feedback, because we're asked to give feedback, we duly give feedback, it goes into a black hole, and then clearly no actions follow from it, and it's only by happenstance we find you're coming up with a completely different scheme. Sorry.
Okay, thanks Roger, thank you. We'll definitely note that point as well. Right, I'm going to move on now. So a couple of questions from Peter Bird. One was about Barrington and whether or not it was consulted as a key stakeholder in view of the anticipated impact of traffic flows on that village. And also another question from Peter about how much are you intending to charge for parking at Foxton, and also what will the catchment area for buses which will use Foxton, what will be the catchment area for buses which will use Foxton as the traffic hub?
Okay, so in terms of the consultation for Barrington, yes, Barrington Parish Council being the appropriate forum were consulted. And we've actually met with them since the engagement period, and I understand they may have made a representation at the GCP Assembly as well. In terms of the parking charge, the indication from the engagement period was that approximately £5 would be appropriate. However, a sort of a more exacting figure will be produced as part of the full business case. and that would be something that would be taken forward by the county council, who would be the operator of the scheme. And then, sorry, Joe, could you repeat the final part of that question?
It was, hold on, I've lost it now. What will be the catchment area for buses which will use Foxton as the traffic hub?
Yeah.
Sorry.
So there is a service that currently runs along the A10 and then sort of connects into Foxton, and obviously Isabel presented about the sort of increased regularity of those services earlier. And then in terms of the development of a what's been classified as a rural bus pilot, the idea is to provide connectivity from Foxton Travel Hub to Whistlesford, and then connecting some of the villages in between. One of the recommendations to the Assembly and then the Executive Board was the further development of this bus service with the Cambridge and Peterborough Combined Authority, who would be sort of responsible for putting that bus service out to tender. We have undertaken some engagement with the parish councils as well as the Combined Authority at present, and the sort of detail of that scheme will be further worked forward, because what has to be factored in are the sort of number of buses, the stopping times, the connectivity with the local communities along the way. So further work will be undertaken on that and presented back to the Executive Board.
Okay, thanks for that, Tim. Lots of comments in the chat, so we'll make sure those are noted. There's one question about whether the recording will be shared. I believe it is going to be, is that right?
Yeah, we'll put the recording of this evening's session up on the GCP YouTube channel.
The presentation is actually on the GCP website, on GCP Foxton page at present as well.
Great, so that's good to know. Thanks, Tim. And then I think one final question. This is a bit of a longer one. So this is from Louise Lord. Some time ago, GCP presented options for an A10 diversion to address issues caused by level crossing. The only realistic rerouting was on the site proposed for the travel hub. We were then advised that the level crossing project was handed to the Combined Authority, who then advised that this project is not on their to-do list and that they had not been consulted on the travel hub. So it's just to ask, has any discussion taken place about whether or not this proposed hub would prevent future rerouting of the A10?
So in terms of who might deliver that scheme, in terms of a bypass, it certainly wouldn't be the GCP. It's not something that aligns with our sort of public transport aspirations to sort of motivate people to drive further and sort of commute, or encourage people to commute as part of you know, their car journey. And what we're trying to do is intercept those journeys here. And as far as I'm aware, I don't know that any sort of public body or highways authority that is seeking to promote a bypass at Foxton.
Okay, thank you for that. And I think that is it for questions. Oh, one final question. How does this link to East West Rail project and immediate routing in the area? And sorry, routing in the immediate area.
The East West Rail undertook a public consultation early in the year. Some of their alignments that they proposed were sort of in and around the proximity of Foxton, and the detail is yet to emerge. However, the early indications were that they would be sort of between Cambridge and Foxton, and not have an interaction with our scheme. Their findings are due to be published from their public engagement, and obviously we will work with them when they produce their findings.
Great, thank you for that, Tim. Thank you for taking all those questions. Thanks to the participants for asking your questions and for the comments made in the chat. And now I'm going to hand back to Tom to close the meeting.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you to everyone for all your questions, as Joe said. And thanks very much to all of our participants who presented and also answered all those questions at length. I hope you got the answers you're after from tonight's meeting. Please do visit the GCP website, where this video will be based on our YouTube page as well. And as we say, we'll put the slides up as well. But thank you for your time tonight, and I'll now close the meeting. Thanks again.